Daf Yomi, Tractate Chullin, page 29a. Top of the page with the words Kedei Shechita. Kedei Shechita Acheres Ugmara Shechita. So kasher Rabbi Amalt Mechza Karov I Tarapala. For an interval equivalent to the duration of the slaughter of another animal, and then completed his slaughter is valid. But if you say the halachic status of a siman of which precisely half was cut and half remained uncut is like that of the majority, then by cutting half the windpipe, he rendered it a treifa because it is as though the majority of the windpipe is severed. Okay. Mi sabret b'behema lo ba'of mima nafsha chi mechza karov havid le'ruba I mechza karov lo aviv lo klum. The Gemara answers, do you hold that this braita is referring to the slaughter of an animal? No. It is referring to the slaughter of a bird, which requires the cutting of only one siman. Whichever way you look at it, the slaughter should be valid if the halachic status of a siman of which precisely half was cut and half remained uncut is like that of the majority. He has performed the cutting of the majority and the slaughter is valid. And if the halachic status of a siman of which precisely half was cut and half remained uncut is not like that of majority, then in cutting half the siman, he did not perform any action that would render the animal a treifa. Toshima Harei Shehaya Chatzi Kone Pagum Yehoshua Olav Kol Shu Gemaro Shechita So Keshero V'Amet Mechza Keroiv Treifa Havio. The Gemara suggests, come in here, another proof contrary to Rav's opinion from a braita. In a case where half of the windpipe was deficient prior to the slaughter, and the slaughterer added to that deficiency an incision of any size and completed it, his slaughter is valid. And if you say that the halachic status of a siman of which precisely half was cut and half remained uncut is like that of the majority, the animal is a treifa, as half its windpipe was deficient before the slaughter. Amarava shani linin treifa deba einan rova nireh leinayim. Rava said the matter of treifa is different, as we require the majority that is clearly visible. If precisely half the windpipe is deficient, it does not appear to be a majority. By contrast, with regard to slaughter, the status of half is like that of the majority. Amar le Abaye, v'lo kol dechen hu u'matrefa di b'mashu mitarpa hechad deva inan ruba be'enan rova nireh leinayim shchita di adika ruba lo mit chatach shira lo kol shchein de be'inan rova nireh leinayim. Abaye said to Rava, and is it not derived to an a fortiori inference that all the more so a conspicuous majority is required for slaughter? And just as with regard to treifa, where the animal is rendered a treifa by deficiency of any size, for example, a minuscule perforation of the gullet, in cases where we require a majority that is clearly visible. With regard to slaughter, where until there is a majority of the simanim cut, the slaughter is not valid, All the more so is it not clear that we require a majority that is clearly visible. Ela dechuli alma mechza al mechza eino karov v'chiyit man drav udrav kehanam v'inyan pesach itmar. Rather, the Gemara revises its understanding of the dispute between Rav and Rav Kahana. Everyone agrees that the halachic status of a siman of which precisely half was cut and half remained uncut is not like that of a siman of which the majority was cut. And when the dispute of Rav and Rav Kahana was stated, it was stated with regard to the matter of the paschal offering. If a majority of the Jewish people were ritually impure on the 14th of Nisan, the paschal offering is sacrificed that day and eaten in a state of impurity. I think it's called Tuma Hutra B'Tzibur. If the Tzibur needed to, you could do it anyway. If only a minority of the Jewish people were impure, the ritually pure majority brings the paschal offering on the 14th of Nisan, and the impure minority brings the paschal offering on the second Pesach 1 month later. And now we're approaching a month after Pesach Sheni. Sunday will be a month after Pesach Sheni. Oh. I see. May 1st was Pesach Sheni, and it was a full moon. And Sunday will be May 31st, and it's a full moon. It's a blue moon this month. Blue moon! I get it. 2 full moons in the month of May. 1 month later, okay. Hareshu hayu Yisrael mechza toichim mechza tmeim Rav ma mechza mechza kerov Rav Kahana ma mechza mechza ena kerov. In a case where the Jewish people were equally divided on the 14th of Nisan, with half of them pure and half of them impure, Rav said the halacha in the case where half the people were impure and half were impure is like that of a case where the majority was impure. And the entire people brings the paschal offering in Nisan. And Rav Kahana said, the halachet, in the case where half the people were impure and half were pure, is not like that of a case where the majority was impure. Therefore, those who were pure bring the paschal offering on the 14th of Nisan, and those who were impure bring the paschal offering on the second Pesach. My time in the Rav dichtiv ish ki hiye tamei lenefesh ish nitche v'tzibur nidachin. The Gemara asks, and there, with regard to the paschal offering, what is the reason? Then Rav accords half the people the status of a majority. It is as is written, any man who shall be impure by reason of a corpse shall observe the Passover to the Lord. On the 14th day of the second month, at the evening, they shall observe it. Numbers 9, 10 through 11. Mamish, this week's Parsha, in Israel. This week's Parsha. Unbelievable. From which it is derived, the ritually impure person is deferred to observe the second Pesach, but a ritually impure congregation is not deferred to observe the second Pesach. The status of half the people is that of the congregation, not that of a collection of individuals. Rov echad ba'of, tanina echad azimna ruba shel echad kamohu. The Mishnah teaches if one cut the majority of one siman in a bird, or the majority of 2 simanim in an animal slaughter is valid. The Gemara asks, we already learn this on another occasion. In the first clause of the Mishnah, the halachic status of the majority of one siman is like that of the entire siman. Why is the redundancy necessary? Hachash, Pashach, Siman. The Gemara provides a mnemonic for the names of the Amoraim who participate in the discussion that ensues. Hey, Rav Hushaya. Kaf is Rav Kahana. Shin is Rav Shimi. Pei is Rav Papa. And Rav Papa is Shin. Let's start again. Hey is Rav Hushaya. Kaf is Rav Kahana. Shin, Rav Shimi. Pei, Rav Papa. Shin, Rav Ashi. And then Chet. What's Chet? Doesn't say. I guess we'll find out. Okay, let's start with the Hey. Amar Rav Shaya Chad b'Chullin v'chada b'Chadash mitzricha diyesh min Chullin has min zagler beruba mishum delav ledam hu tzarich aval kedoshim ledam hu tzarich emala dizagler beruvad digagule. Rav Shaya said, one mention of the equivalence between majority and whole is referring to slaughter of non-sacred birds and animals, and one is referring to slaughter of sacrificial birds or animals, and it is necessary for the Tana to teach both cases, as if the Tana had taught us only the case of slaughter of non-sacred birds and animals, one might think that it is there that one suffices with the majority of one siman because he does not require the blood. He seeks merely to slaughter the animal, but in the case of sacrificial birds and animals where he requires the blood for sprinkling on the altar, say that it will not suffice for him to cut the majority, and the slaughter is not valid until there is a cutting of the entire windpipe or a gullet. And if the Tana taught us only the case of slaughter of sacrificial birds and animals, one might think that one must cut a majority of the siman because he requires the blood for sprinkling on the altar, but with regard to the slaughter of non-sacred birds and animals, where he does not require the blood, say that cutting half the siman is sufficient, and there is no need to cut a majority. Therefore, the Tana teaches us the principle twice, once to teach that a majority suffices in the case of sacrificial animals, and once to teach that a majority is required in the case of non-sacred animals. The Gemara asks, which cause the Mishnah is referring to cutting majority of the simanim in non-sacred birds and animals, and which is referring to cutting the majority of the simanim in sacrificial birds and animals? Rav Kahana said it stands to reason that the first clause of the Mishnah is referring to the slaughter of non-sacred birds and animals, and the latter clause is referring to the slaughter of sacrificial birds and animals. The Gemara asks, from where does Rav Kahana arrive at that conclusion? The Gemara answers, it is from the fact that the first clause of the Mishnah teaches one who slaughters by cutting one siman in a bird and two simanim in an animal. And if it enters your mind that the first clause is referring to the case of sacrificial birds and animals, the Tana should have formulated it as one who pinches the nape of the neck of a bird, as sacrificial birds are not slaughtered with a knife but pinched with a fingernail. Elamai Seifa b'Kedoshim Shchita soy keshera. What are we holding here? Sefer Kedoshim Shchita soy keshera Melikaso keshera Mebaile. Halakashim, I saling behema, Tanamish, Kitas Kshera, Elation Mechdeal of Kai. He is a Gadayat with Oshim Amadi. The Gemara asks, rather, what do you say? That the latter clause is referring to slaughter of sacrificial birds and animals, but the Tana teaches in the latter clause, if one cut the majority of one siman in a bird, or the majority of two simanim in an animal, his slaughter is valid. If the reference to sacrificial birds and animals the Tana should have formulated, his pinching is valid. The more answers, this is not difficult, since the Tana concluded with mention of the slaughter of an animal. He also taught the slaughter is valid, which is referring to the sacrificial animal. But in the first clause, since the Tana stands to begin with the case of a bird, if it enters your mind that the reference is to sacrificial birds, the Tana should have formulated it one who pinches the nape of the neck of a bird. Rav Shimi Barashi said that one arrives at the conclusion that the first clause referring to the slaughter of non-sacred birds and animals from here, as the Tana teaches one who slaughters by cutting one sin in a bird. And if it enters your mind that the reference is to the slaughter of the sacrificial birds, isn't there the bird burnt offering, which requires two simanim to be cut? Elamai Sefer B'Kedoshim Roi V'Echad Voiv Yoika Oilas Hoiv Diboy Shnei Simanim Mai Choi V'Echad Rov Kol Echad V'Echad Udin Hu Didikatani Rov Shnayim Keveni Gechados Disagilei V'Echad Siban Mishum Achila B'Zigalei. The Gemara asks, rather, what do you say? That the latter clause is referring to the slaughter of sacrificial birds and animals. But the Tana teaches in the latter clause, if one cut the majority of one siman in a bird, or the majority of two simanim in an animal, his slaughter is valid if the reference is to sacrificial birds. Isn't there the bird burnt offering which requires the pinching of two simanim? The Gemara answers, what is the meaning of the majority of one siman? It means the majority of each and every one of the two. And by right, the Tana should have taught the majority of two. But since there is the bird sin offering which suffices with the cutting of one siman, due to that reason, the matter is not clear cut for him. Therefore, the Tana formulated the halacha in the manner that could apply to one siman, meaning in the case of a sin offering, and two simanim, meaning in the case of a burnt offering and of animal offerings. Rav Papa Amar, Reish B'chul Me'achad Diktani Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ashish V'Lesaver Yidin V'Ligi Rabanan Ale'aleh Iyam B'Shlom V'Chulin Shapir Ela Iyam B'Kedoshim Amai Pligi Rabanan Ale'aleh V'Atmo L'Dam Hu Tzarich. Rav Papa said that one arrives at the conclusion that the first clause is referring to slaughter of non-sacred birds and animals from here. As the Tana teaches, that Rabbi Yehuda says, the slaughter is not valid until he cuts the veins in the neck, and the rabbis disagree with him, and do not require that one cut the veins in the neck. Granted, if you say that the reference is to the slaughter of non-sacred birds, it works out well. But if you say that the reference is to the slaughter of sacrificial birds, why do the rabbis disagree with him? He himself, meaning the one slaughtering, requires blood in order to sprinkle it on the altar, which should warrant cutting the veins. Rav Ashi Amar Seifa B'Kedoshim Me'achad Diktani Yeshoichet Shnei Choshin Ge'echad Shechid Zechshecha Shechid Abad In L'Chelo. Rav Ashi said that one arrives at the conclusion that the latter clause is referring to slaughter of sacrificial birds and animals from here, as the Tana teaches in the Mishnah 30b. One who slaughters by cutting two animals' heads simultaneously, his slaughter is valid. The Gemara infers from the precise language of the Mishnah, one who slaughters indicating that after the fact, yes, his slaughter is valid, but one may not slaughter two animals simultaneously. Yamad b'shem v'kedashim hainu l'chatchila lo. Mishum d'tanya Yosef Tizbach. Shelo yeshnam shochatim zevach echad tizbachu. Shelo yeh echad shochet shnei zevachim. Granted, if you say that the reference is to the sacrificial birds or animals, this is the reason that one may not slaughter two animals simultaneously ab initio. It is due to that which Rabbi Yosef teaches in a Braita, and when you sacrifice a peace offering to the Lord, you shall sacrifice it that you may be accepted. Leviticus 19:15. The term Tizbachu can be divided into two terms. You shall sacrifice Tizbach and who? The term you and it. You shall sacrifice it, Tizbach and who? The term you shall sacrifice Tizbach is derived that there will not be two people slaughtering one offering. From the term you shall sacrifice it, Tizbachu, is derived that one person may not slaughter two offerings simultaneously. Amar of God, Tizbachu Ketiv Tizbachehu. That's what it's printed here. Yeah. And Rav Kana said to explain the derivation of the first halacha in the Braita, although the term Tizbachuhu is vocalized in the plural, leading to the conclusion that two people may slaughter an animal together, nevertheless, because the word is written without a vav, the term Tizbachehu is written in the singular, indicating that two individuals may not slaughter the offering. But if you say that the reference is to the slaughter of non-sacred birds, it should be permitted even ab initio. Ve'af Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish savar reisha v'chulim v'sei b'kedoshim. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish mi'ach hashishinu ruba shelechad kamau lamashenu rav echad ba'o v'shnei shtan b'behema. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish holds that the first clause of the Mishnah is referring to the slaughter of non-sacred birds and animals, and the latter clause is referring to the slaughter of sacrificial birds and animals. As Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, since we learned in the Mishnah that the halachic status of the majority of one simon is like that of the entire simon, why did we also need to learn later in the Mishnah the majority of one simon in a bird, or the majority of two simonim in an animal? The latter clause is obvious based on the principle articulated in the first clause. Lefi shishaninu heviu lo et hatamid karato me'ach achar shchituto al yedo yachol lomar kvihe pasul. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish explains, since we learned in the Mishnah Yom B, they brought him the sheep for the daily morning offering, and he slaughtered it karatzo, by cutting most of the way through the gullet and the windpipe, and a different priest completed the slaughter on his behalf, so that the high priest could receive the blood in a vessel and proceed with the order of the Yom Kippur service. One might have thought that if the other priest did not complete the cutting of the two simanim, the slaughter would not be valid. Therefore, we learn in the Mishnah, if one cut the majority of one siman in a bird, the majority of two simanim in an animal, his slaughter is valid. The Gemara analyzed the statement of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. The master said one might have thought that if the other priest did not complete the cutting of two simanim, the slaughter would not be valid. To be continued on 29b.